Hello everyone, my name is Jenny Russell. I'm the Director of Education and Learning at the RIBA, and I'm really delighted to be able to welcome you to today's Tutor Symposium. It's fantastic to have architects Eliana Voutsadaki and Sarah Stevens with us today to look at the topic and to consider the topic, concept and idea, and thinking about how to develop a critical position. Eliana and Sarah, you're both very, very welcome, and we appreciate the time that you've put into preparing for today's symposium. Eliana is an architect and an academic. She's also a RIBA Studio Tutor, and she's currently based in San Francisco. And so for her at the moment, it's 6:30 in the morning. Sarah is an architect and academic at the University of Brighton, and she's she is a former RIBA Studio external examiner. And they have been working together to put together today's symposium. So we'd like to, without further ado, invite you to give your presentations, following which there should be time for some discussion and conversation and some questions. If you want to go ahead.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon for everyone, depending on what side of the world everyone's in. So Sarah and I are here to talk to you today about concepts and ideas and how important they are in developing your own unique architectural language and proposal in education. And this has been very strongly linked to being able to develop what we call a critical position whilst developing our design project. And this is what we'd like to talk about today. Sarah will be introducing herself in a little while, and we'll both be giving our own account of approaches that we feel we've experienced students can use to develop this critical position in their design work. So as mentioned, I've been a programme leader of a Park honours programme at the Metropolitan College in Athens, and I've been working with undergraduate and postgraduate students as well for the OBU RIBA Studio programme since I think 2008, and have also been a course director at London South Bank University at the School of Built Environment and Architecture. So I'm just going to start, let me just click on the slide, here we go. So just to put the concept in context of the entire process, architecture, this is a quote by the Quality Assurance Agency, the QAA for Higher Education, which says that architecture draws together conceptual, contextual, ethical and material considerations in the realization of space and or form. So we're going to be talking about the concept bit today and how it relates to everything else and the entire process. Being design studio tutors for a long time, we have come to appreciate that identifying an initial response, this inspiration or concept can be rather tricky. And the success of a project is understood to be linked to this strong idea that we have, this initial observation that should ignite the creative process and make our work very unique and special to us. And in response to that observation, there's a series of personal architectural decisions that should create this unique architectural language that is very personal to us. So a couple of quotes that I found on what this concept or idea is. So it's what makes the design proposal what it is, and the notion that provides a purpose for our design proposal. And what's important is that it kind of remains constant. It needs to develop but remain there in some form right from the beginning, right from when we observe this or when we visit the site, all the way through to our final drawings. And it can also be described as the inspiration, intent or philosophy that actually comes to form the backbone of our design work. What we've essentially come up with is that the concept is a very personal reaction that each student has to a specific theme or site or object or place, and it's important that the student develops this passionate reaction as it will be the generating factor behind their design proposal, and it should lead the entire design process. So a concept is regarded as strong when it starts to give a clear direction for each decision that we make in our design proposal and each step of the design narrative. So design briefs are issued in design studios when studying architecture, and what they do is they set out a series of tasks that will help students generate this design narrative. But it's effectively the student's own inspiration and personal reaction and sensitivities to the site that will create their individual design approach, and that's what makes it strong and important, and that's what will develop their own architectural language. So initially students will need to identify what triggers their own curiosity, and then they will be required to describe and analyze this, and the brief will come and help put that in a narrative order. And what you've probably found is that if you're an undergraduate student and in first or second year, for example, briefs tend to be a lot more thorough. Their requirements are quite set out in stone, if you like. As you move along into diploma, you're probably going to be asked to write your own briefs. So, for example, it's the day that we visit the site and we find an object that we passionately believe oozes the essence of an area, because that's what the brief asks us to do. So what we're required to do is collect it and photograph it and measure it and sketch it and draw it, which means that we're asked to describe it. And would that be enough to make a concept strong? And well, no, because it needs to be constant and developed throughout the rest of the design process. And that's where the critical position comes into the equation, where we're asked to not just describe an object, but analyze it, observe it, transform it, experiment with it, test it, so that it actually empowers our original idea, our original observation even more. And it's that analysis and the research that we put into it that begins to demonstrate what we call critical thinking. So just to go through what the difference is between describing an idea and analysing an idea. When we describe an idea or a concept in architecture, we need to basically document how the eye or a video camera sees this object. So we will need to closely observe this idea or object. We will need to draw it and measure it, understand its properties and its proportions, its materiality, its material qualities, and how it's used. Where do we see it? Is it just the site, or is it in many other places within the same area, for example? So you're basically describing what exactly you see, what anyone would see. You probably wouldn't have to be a student of architecture to be able to describe an object. This is an example, a couple of images on the side where a first year student observed someone's reflective material jacket becoming the light at the end of this dark tunnel, and just used photographs and a drawing to describe this. So in architecture, the description gives an account of the concept or idea. So in analysing the concept, you will then need to go beyond just the mere description of this idea, which anyone else, as mentioned, could do. You will need to begin to research, transform it, and experiment with it in a way that explains why you so strongly believe that this object is so important. So it's the analysis of an idea. Is the point-by-point study of how an architectural observation is translated into architectural components to make all parts of an architectural proposal work in relation to any other part. And to develop this critical position, you will need to make the observation, then describe it, and then analyse it. And again, this is from the same student, these images, where the student, after making the observation with the light at the end of the tunnel and documented it in various other places around the site, she experimented with negative and positive space and ended up designing a yoga center in which you enter as a user feeling anxious and stressed in a black box, seeking well-being and enlightenment, but then all negative feelings are resolved once entering the internal courtyard and being flooded with natural light, and then a white box in which you do yoga. So when we talk about analysis and analysing our initial observation, we just don't ask merely what happened. We need to ask why, and that's what analysis kind of is. So why did the student of architecture or architect choose a specific function? Why did they choose specific materials? Why did they designate certain rooms in certain proportions and dimensions? Why did he or she designate different kinds of light and space to different kinds of users and functions in the building? So when we talk about analysis, this demands that you do ask the most profound questions. So just to explain this from an educational perspective, we've got, you can see what we call the pyramid of knowledge by Benjamin Bloom, which explains the taxonomy of educational objectives, and this classification of educational goals developed after a series of conferences in the late 50s and early 60s, which were designed to improve communication between educators on the design of curriculum. So we've been talking about description and analysis, and you can see here that the lower parts of the pyramid, which would translate to description and describing our idea by understanding its qualities and deeply getting to know the original form, which will allow us to fully comprehend this idea and be ready to take our design process to the next level, where critical thinking is evident by analysis and synthesis and evaluation, and where we take the idea and by applying deep research and analysis, we develop our own architectural language to transform it into our unique architectural proposal. So in education, we talked earlier about the design brief helping setting out the process. It will help to generate the narrative. And include the initial observation, where we need to describe the idea via drawings and photographs. We will then need to experiment with it using mappings, collages, models, which is what we call the observation analysis. And then we will need to put that in context of our site and look at it socially and geographically, look at access to the site, circulation, how we move around it, how we get there, looking how the light moves around the site, and also looking at the social history of the site and how it connects with its surrounding built environment. All of the above should help us develop this function where we think about the user experience and how important this proposal will be in relation to the kind of broader site, and what the user experience will be, and how we'll move, how we'll get to the building, and then how we'll move through it. We may use precedents we may investigate similar projects with similar buildings of similar function, or we may start to look at precedents that resemble the architectural forms that we're beginning to develop, and then we will start our proposal iterations, what we call the pre-design phase, where we'll test our ideas onto the site, and we'll produce a series of options that and come up with the best one, the one that we feel mostly empowers what our original idea was, before we move into our final drawings, our plans, our sections, our elevations, and also within all of that, thinking about everything else, such as the materiality, technological systems, sustainability strategy as well. The initial idea should develop through the entire process, right? All of those steps that we've just mentioned in a critical way through analysis, and be evident in the entire architectural language that is created. And even though the design brief will ask for the same requirements and possibly on the same site for the same functions sometimes, it's the initial observation and its thorough research and analysis that makes each student's project important and unique. So to make sure that we can develop this critical position, this is a little bit how the programs are kind of designed. We need to make sure that we take all aspects of architecture into account. So on the diagram, the grey diagram, you can see how the core module that we study as students of architecture, the design module, is connected in a web-like way with all of the aspects of architecture. So your idea will need to be evident in the choice of function that you make, an architectural style, which will be reinforced by your history and theory modules, your choice of technological system, the materials that you choose, and your sustainability strategy will need to have been derived from your idea. All of this will need to be communicated digitally and physically, in a way that empowers your original concept. And of course, you'll need to follow a set of ethical standards, regulations, legislation to reinforce the choice of function, user experience, and social and ethical characteristics of your proposed design in relation to that specific area. So these responses, which are triggered and go back to your original idea, are what form your unique architectural language, which is essentially the informed architectural decisions of interconnected thought processes, which connect to all the various different aspects of architecture, and as mentioned, that is what makes the project unique and personal, and hopefully helps to create innovative architectural proposals that reflect and communicate the technological challenges, the social needs, and environmental conditions that we face as a society. So just to recap on this bit, in order for a concept to become convincing and strong, it needs to be apparent in the entire architectural description of the narrative of your architectural proposal. So this will include the function of your building, the way that your building looks in terms of its aesthetics, the context, the physical, the social, the historical context, the ideology and the technology, the environmental systems and structure of your building. And there's a little acronym there, FACET, so which in Latin means he, she, or it makes for this sequence. So I'm going to go through a diploma project. It's an RIBA Studio project by Ioli Bellagini. She was an RIBA Studio student that completed her part 2 in 2020, and she's gone through an incredible amount of work with this project, and I've just chosen some key images just to try and give an example of seeing this initial observation that the student made develop through the entire scheme. And I think Ioli's with us, so hopefully she can comment on this earlier after Sarah's finished her bit of the presentation. The body of work was actually enormous, and the student did really well. I think she was nominated by OBU for a RIBA President's Medal. But I've just made a very small selection of some images here, just to kind of go through the various the observation. And this is the building that she chose. The brief was function follows form. It's a brief that the OBU postgraduate diploma uses. Many of you might, if you're diploma students, you might have come across this brief. And the chosen site is a 1909 glassworks and fertilizer factory complex located in Piraeus harbour in Athens. If you've ever been to the Greek islands via Athens, you've probably had to get a bus or train down to the harbour to start island hopping. So the primary observation that Ioli made was in the beauty of the site and the building itself. So she spotted this unique transparent structure, the abandoned factory, and that was the starting point of her design narrative. And her first observation was to do with letting natural light enter the almost derelict roof, destroyed roof, and that led her to visualize this new poetic place that promoted well-being and cleanliness, and relating that back to the idea that this was a fertilizer, a building that produced fertilizers. So the rays of light going through this derelict structure created for her a transition element towards the sea. And you can probably see, I don't know if you can, but just on the image on the right, you can see how close the building sits to the sea. So her site analysis started by this sun study, and she began to observe how the light touches this massive metal frame of the factory and captured the shadows generated via the light penetrating the structure. This is a few in plan how the light moved around her building. She used that to begin to develop her own architectural language. She started looking, I think she did 4 months of analysis. She can probably confirm that in a little while. And this is January here, where she produced a series of what she called architecture shadow vocabulary, analysing how the light created shadows around the building, and made a series of concept models as well, using the shadow vocabulary. This developed, because concepts do develop into other things. She began also looking at how the light highlighted the beauty of the existing derelict rubble, and developed and brought in the concept of spolia, which led the student to begin exploring how the reuse and revalue of the existing site materiality can begin to form the inner world of the factory. So the light generated the shadow vocabulary, which set out the grid and the rules of the architectural design process, and this triggered the concept of spolia, and the two related ideas started developing space and forms, and they were projected in plan, section, and elevation to create spaces that used light to develop the concept of purity and cleanliness that the existing structure inspired into this new function, which was a thalassotherapy retreat, a sea therapy retreat. And that's where her proposal iterations began. So she used all of her analysis and research and her shadow vocabulary and her concept of spolia. And this led the design process, and she began a series of site-specific experimentations that would transform the interior world of the factory, the fertilizer factory, into the thalassotherapy retreat. In terms of technology, the interior world of the existing factory transformed into this new function, and what Eoli did was to design a new structural maze, which would be inserted into the existing footprint of the building in such a way that it captured the light and connected the city of Athens with the sea and the Piraeus port to create this fascinating, almost ethereal space of calmness and well-being. And you can see her drawings, the new kind of technical structural maze sitting within the existing building, and again her final images just showing this quality of light going through the building, going through this new structure now, and creating this atmosphere of wellness and well-being, going all the way through to her final drawings. And finally, her plan, that you could even see some of the shadow vocabulary kind of diagrams becoming kind of, these are the three pools, and the little shadow vocabularies become part of the supporting services for the poor use. So I'm going to stop. And hopefully pass on to Sarah to talk a little bit about her, and then hopefully we can speak a little bit more about it during the discussion. That's it from me for now. Thank you so much.
Okay, and can I just check that this is sharing okay?
Yeah.
Fantastic, it's worked. So hi, I'm Sarah, and I've been involved with the RIBA Studio since about 2005, which seems quite a while now. Fortunately, had the opportunity to be an external examiner recently, which was really interesting to see the wide range of work. But I've taught for quite some time at Oxford Brookes, where I taught in postgrad and then ran an undergrad unit for quite a few years, and also taught undergrad unit at the Bartlett and now at Brighton, where teach between postgrad, undergrad, and look after our PhD students. So I wanted to start with this question, why? So when you enter into a design review or a design examination, this is the big question. Why is it this form? Why that material choice? Why that site? Why that brief? And there are an awful lot of choices that we have to make when we design. And the concept and the critical position are the reasons why we make a certain choice. They're the answers to why. So I'm going to run through the process that I've used in the past, which focuses on the critical position, and show examples of student work, which looks at how this drives design decisions, evolving architectural language, drawn language, and unifies all the aspects of the design proposal and gives ultimately the answer to why. If I can get it to move. Maybe I have to do it that way. Right, okay, different controls. So how do we start? What is the concept? How do you find the right one? How can you be sure that it's the best concept? How can you be sure it's going to lead to the best work? And what even on earth is a concept? So the word concept, it can be itself really a bit slippery, and sometimes it can feel like maybe it's a bit abstract. And if so, it can sometimes help to think of it in terms of a research territory or project focus, because that just expresses what it is, what it does. It's the focus that you're going to explore through your work. And that starting point, it can maybe seem really hard to start. Where do you start from? What do you choose? But in fact, it's actually by far the simplest step there is, because there's simply no wrong starting points. Whatever it is, as long as it's an honest reaction, it will always lead you to your project as you move through the next steps in the process. So think about, when you're on the site, what intrigues you, what interests you, what annoys you on the site, just one thing, focus in on it. So spending time in the site, being careful to really look, but also to not ignore responses, excuse me, that might feel naive. Instead, start to nurture them, interrogate them, and really start to understand what they're starting to tell you. So any honest reaction to the site will lead to your critical position. And at one level, really you're inquiring into yourself, because you're wanting to understand your relationship to the site. So two people could start with what might appear initially to be the same starting point and end up with very different projects. And that's because they're different people with different concerns. So one way to do this is to start by capturing this concern through a photograph or some photographs, images that, and maybe even words that solidify it as your chosen focus and your chosen concept. So this first of the projects, there's two projects. This is Dan from Oxford Brookes a few years ago, and our site was in central London. He went there and it's a concern over what you're supposed to see. You're supposed to go and look at Big Ben. You're supposed to see the tourist sites, but there was so much else going on, which was engaging him with the kind of more gritty day-to-day nature of the site that you weren't supposed to see. So that really intrigued him. So he was kind of asking questions about that, understanding the nature of his concern. And then this is Amanda from the Bartlett, and we had again had a central London site, and she was really concerned with the amount of CCTV cameras, the amount of the way that your life was being captured the whole time. But then that led to kind of thinking, well, social media, how all these sites kind of track our presence, and the idea of kind of a montage with the CCTV camera within a bedroom kind of captures that idea about it going into your innermost private spaces. So that starts things off. But if it was to stay as a simple, unexamined reaction, it would be really highly limited and too naive to support the development of the work. So just identifying that you enjoy the rippling of water, the play of a feather in the breeze, so a starting point, that's fine. But left unexamined, it's only able to become a direct translation of that kind of form. And it's really highly limited. It's not engaging with the potential of architecture. So I feel is a really great starting point. It needs to be there, but then as soon as it is, it needs to be inquired into. You need to challenge and explore and ground the ideas. So the concept's not abstract at all. It's a means of turning your values into architecture through embodying this critical position. And so it asks you to engage with the issues, determine your own position in relationship to contemporary context, and then apply that as a rationale for design. So through this, start to explore others' work that engage with similar things. Look to other fields, theory, art, literature, film. Find work that really resonates with your concerns, and then explore this to understand their approach, their manner of engagement, and through this more precisely define your own. What's your attitude towards it? What position do you take in the arguments, the debates that are coming up in others' work? And then really start to identify those you'd aligned yourself with. So why does it matter? Why do we need a critical position? What's all this about? So a critical position is a choice of what we think, of what matters to us. And so to kind of step back and look at it in the wider context, throughout human history, all cultures have lived within thoughts of the world, telling themselves stories about the world. So a medieval mind, full of stories of the edges of the world, dog-headed people that live over in the other valley that you can't get to, or worlds which talk about how economics is a driving force. They're all just different stories we inhabit at different times. And they're the way we think about the world, our understanding of the world, the reality that drives our interaction with it, and the consequences they bring. And just because the past ideas seem weird, it doesn't mean that we are suddenly right. These stories are not just, potentially problematic, but they're also really vital, because the world is an incredibly complex place, and we need them to make sense of the world. But the thing is, they're not reality, and therein lies the issue. So when we interact with stories, with fairy tales, we interact with a very real world and with very real consequences. So innocent people in the past have been tortured as witches. Ancient forests have been torn down to increase profits. Sea journeys have been planned to avoid falling from the edge of the world. All actions due to the stories we live by start to reveal the power of the way we think about the world. And this, I love this quote, it just sums it up so well, that the ultimate hidden truth of the world is something we make, and we could just as easily make differently. So take that a bit further. Felix Guattari is probably best known for his collaborations with Deleuze. He saw it as our responsibility to equip others with the tools to construct their own subjectivities, their own understanding of the world, to reveal this hidden truth, and to equip people to be able to rethink and reinvent the world. And Guattari, he was only one voice amongst many, such as Virilio and many others, who cited the urgent need for a change in the story we live by. And in the midst of environmental crisis, it's really hard to dispute this need for change. But what they're pointing to is the power of the thought that underpins our actions, and how a change in this can change the world. So from this perspective, education really is about how to think, not what to think. And it's not about being inducted into someone else's understanding. It's not about being a passive receiver, about being told what to think, but about having control over the production of your own knowledge, working in collaboration with your tutors to evolve your own subjectivity, your own voice, your own story. And this can be described as a critical position, and wielding it, using it as a foundation for design decisions, constructs alternative futures. So our way of thinking about the world, our place in it, is at the basis of everything we do, the impact we have on our environment, on everyone and everything else around us. And what we think holds a whole load of power, and design grows from that thought. It's the physical manifestation of thought. So when we design architecture, we're drawing fictions, proposing future ways we might inhabit a space and interact with it. And through this, it's revealing the shadow of alternative futures. And so by rooting design within a clear critical position, it makes this a very real and inhabitable place. It opens up a portal into another way of being, illustrates the potential for other ways of inhabiting our world. And so a critical position focused on a concern for equality of all species, for example, would evolve a very different type of architecture, quite different to that we're accustomed to. And it would be drawn from another possible reality, another way of living in the world, and it brings that reality into that space. So when we begin, we must first turn to and inquire into the design of the thought that drives the design, the story, the critical position. It's fundamental, it's absolutely the base of everything. And it's important to be in control of what you're saying through your design. And so therefore, this roots your design work in things you care about. It challenges you to interrogate and crystallize that thinking, to offer its informed foundation, and uncovers the architecture that grows from it. This means that you become implicated in your work. It becomes personally meaningful because it's focused on something you fundamentally believe in, and that also really aids motivation. So it's really about the evolution of your own voice, your own informed subjectivity, and through exploring that concept, project focus, you're constructing your own knowledge, becoming an expert in your own field of investigation. And this research-based teaching approach really aims to assist you in becoming independent practitioners, evolving the positions which start to define you as a designer and could evolve to lead into your future practice and define your approach. So through the application of this to your design work, you can start to reinvent the world. And think that Jean and Raby's work is an interesting example to turn to kind of try and illustrate some of these ideas. They evolved ideas of critical design, so through situating their work within thoughts of other potential futures. And this one is based on a UN statement that we need to increase food production by 70% in the next 40 years if we were to have enough. They take that and then look at that future and then start to design new foraging equipment we're going to need for these food shortages. And so from that, and for the very presence of these objects, it starts to conjure this other reality, this other future into presence. So at this stage, really start to rigorously explore your position, research your territory, and become expert in your field. So to return to our students' work, so this is Amanda with her concerns for our connection to the digital. And so she's really researching that, finding out, scary figures about spending 30% of our waking life online, social media. The huge percentage of people at any one time in the world that would be connected online. And then looking at it in terms of, well, where is all this data going? What is all that about? And this was back in 2019. At that point, 90% of the world's data had been generated over the last couple of years. You can only imagine what that is now. And from this careful investigation, she started to unpick why it really mattered to her. And it started to become about actually this, we feel that this thing is something that's that doesn't have a footprint. It's just in the cloud. We can send it. It doesn't have environmental implications, but actually, it's this massive data centers, huge amount of power that goes into holding all this stuff, all these tweets, all these photos of people having their lunch. And it amounted to, at that point, 3% of global CO2. So that became her concern and her position. And then we have Dan with his project. So he was concerned about the real history of the place being kind of lost and glossed over. So he came up with this idea of a subversive restoration. So he wanted to really start to show all the cracks, all the aging, all the change, all the histories. And then through that, looking to precedents in other fields. So he was looking at artists, he was looking at traditions from other cultures to do with how these kind of ideas of restoration, how it can be really celebrated in the work. And so those examples really inform their work moving forward. So once you've got that clearer idea, it's about returning to the site. And with that in your mind, you can start to identify where else it's present. Your first response was really an example of something. So what else does it relate to? Where else is it found? Starting to see the site through that perspective helps you to use that as a basis to start to design within it. It really cements the understanding and it starts to set out terms of engagement with your site. And it can also start to identify drawing tools sometimes to assist with design process and with communication at the end. So a drawn language, so a concern for history and memory to do with layered drawings and so on. So this is Dan, and he's starting to draw the site from terms of, well, what are people taking photos of? Where are they situated? So he's going to all these different platforms and kind of identifying what's going on and seeing the site through those perspectives. So what are they taking the photos of? And this is him kind of zooming in and seeing the site from that perspective. And then we have Amanda, and she's kind of tracking down, well, okay, interested in the coverage of the site. So where are all these CCTV cameras? And as you can see, it's covered. And then the actual focus on the site, what does it look like? Where are you not covered by CCTV? This is in the middle of Whitehall, so you can only begin to imagine how much is there. But it starts to transform the way of seeing that site, which is really helpful for the design process. So another stage that could come in at this point is to learning through experimentation. And learning through discovery is a really rich way of learning, and it supports the evolution of your own knowledge. There's nothing kind of better about learning something, about being able to go out and actually poke the thing. It builds a far deeper understanding of what you're dealing with, and that, personal engagement with the object of your interest. So this is Manda kind of taking on this concern about the CCTV cameras, and she did a walk around London, she had a day, and she was recording all her online activity, doing transactions, all that sort of thing as well. But this highlights the CCTV element of that work. So she was tracked her route with her phone, and then the photos at the bottom, it's from when she went online and she found this site which you could access CCTV footage. So she knew from a phone where she'd been at certain times, and she was able to take the photos. So each of those photos includes her. And then later on in the design process, because it became about this concern about the environmental footprint, the energy that is being used all the time for the cloud, she wanted to express this. So it was an understanding that there's actually energy, there's heat. These data centers were creating a huge amount of heat. And so they were creating their own artificial weather. And she wanted to really amplify that. She was starting to think about, well, how can I create weather? Can I create my own clouds? So she was doing lots of experiments and tests around how she could build clouds. And then this is Dan, and he's doing some experiments with these online photo platforms, and he tries to subvert it. So he uploads loads of photos of the things you're not supposed to look at, and then looks at the weight of these different types of images over time. You know, can you change what the dominant images are? And then there's also the way that you can develop and experiment with your thinking through making objects and making objects to think through. So this was an early one that Dan did, where he'd got an SLR camera, and he put this onto this device, which would only allow him to take photographs at longer intervals. So it's this whole pressure mechanism that delayed the photograph. So it was thinking through the ideas. And then later on, when it became clear it was becoming something to do with making these casts, making these restorations in the streets of London, he started to test, well, what is it to cast? What's this process? So he actually did it himself. And then there are parts of the site you're not supposed to see and you're not given access to. So making objects which would enable him to have access and see these other places. So kind of thinking through objects again. So then there's the next stage, architectural language, and it's kind of where it feels like it's heading into the design, and it can feel like you're back to square one. It can feel incredibly intimidating. But your critical position and concept propose those clear routes forward. They are the answers to why, and there are a lot of answers that are in them, but there are a lot of questions that are raised at this point. So start to explore how that defines the architectural language. Think about what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And it can sometimes help to actually think about what's the most inappropriate thing you could possibly do. It seems so much easier. So something completely laughable. So if you were concerned with the environment, you know, what could be the most inappropriate thing you could possibly do? So what if you thought, okay, so if I put a huge, fully glass, air-conditioned tower block on this site with big concrete foundations and perhaps flooring sourced from the other side of the world, you know, maybe that's pretty inappropriate. But that's really helpful, because when you can see what it shouldn't be, you can see the opposite, and it helps you to kind of take that first stage into what should it be then? If that's so wrong, what's right? So that can aid those first steps, and it's using your critical position to help you do that. Another first starting point might be exploring the relationship to the site. So if your concept, for example, focuses on memory, it might just start to suggest initial approaches to how the layered history of the site is engaged. So it might be about a concern for the flow of the past, the present, memory evolving on the site, allowing the past to dissolve, or perhaps it's about preserving the past as a permanent record. So having a clear critical position really provides you with that answer. So together, the concept and critical position define the route forward. They determine everything from the approach to the brief to the materials selected. And in that example of a concern for memory, you know, with materials, maybe it's of importance that the materials themselves can hold a memory of occupation. So it starts to become more a case of uncovering what the design wishes to be, and through multiple iterations, you get closer to identifying its true nature, and the architectural implications of the critical position, that thought that's driving the design, is the thing that starts to come through. So there's a logic in your concept and position that really lead you through the design. And you can ask it every question the design asks you, and it will come up with the answer. So as you work gradually forward, understand that the drawings, the collages, experimentation models, they're tools for revealing and sculpting that understanding, moving us towards the answers, evolving the design. And thinking of the idea of tacit knowledge at this point can be really helpful. It's an idea about that discusses about how we can know more than we can say, and how our brains are processing this massive complex information, but then working through the implications of your critical position within your mind. And it's something we could start to tease out through our drawings and our making. So back to our projects. So this is Amanda's project. So it's these big data center with these greenhouses which create digital weather, kind of glowing in the darkness. So the whole language is to do with these big machines and then creating these environments of artificial weather. And it starts to produce these weather conditions which are related to the amount that the data center has been used. So it starts to become a warning. So you'd have kind of tropical hurricanes or something in there if you start to really push the amount that you're using. So the idea is that it starts to give a voice through environmental conditions to the impact that's being had. And you get this whole environment forming, which she thought of as a kind of shared workspace within there that has its own weather that's driven by this cloud, this digital cloud. And whilst it's also the heat is also being fed out to heat surrounding housing as well. And so the architecture is not just about the computing stacks and all that, it's also about the pipes. So the pipes and become part of the actual structure, a part of the language of the building, and quite a important element, as you can see here as well. So it informed the design all the way through to the detail. And so with Dan's this concern for histories, the concern for not polishing off and kind of purifying the city, having the gritty layers of history being present, informed how he designed and set it into the site. And then the nature of this the brief, which was going to be for this place which would start doing these castings for restoration of the city, rather than them all being polished out. And then this concern for the layers of history and not getting rid of them informed right the way down to the one-to-one detail. So how it was so important that this new structure wrapped around the existing, it didn't destroy it. It was all about actually preserving that structure, and the way that a stair might wrap around, it wasn't going to touch, it wasn't going to destroy these layers of history. So the concept and the critical position that's situated in it are really, for me, the bedrock of design. They're the answer to why for any aspect of your proposal, and they answer any questions that it might pose in its development. And the process is about finding your own voice, your own position, and what that means in terms of architecture. So starting to define yourself as an independent practitioner. And so this is all why we make one decision, not another. Choose that material rather than another. Determines everything from the siting to the detail, and it's all held within this word concept. And all that means really is, what is it that's driving your work? What is your position? And it's very, very far from being abstract. It means turning your values into architecture and constructing visions of alternative futures. I'll leave it there and then open it up to discussion and thoughts.
Sarah, Eliana, thank you so much for your presentations to us. They are really thought-provoking and beautiful in how you describe the concept as a personal reaction. I wonder if there are any initial comments or questions that our participants today would like to have. If you maybe would raise your hands. Rachel.
Hi, sorry, everyone's keeping quiet, so I thought I might start it then.
Thank you.
So, yeah, you were talking about critical position, and the examples were really, really nice examples, quite clear to follow the process. So in terms of getting your own viewpoint, would you suggest starting the initial research and maybe going to site first, or doing a bit of background research before then developing how you want to approach your own critical position of the project initially?
Well, shall I start? I mean, for me, it's really helpful to have the kind of concerns you might have from the brief and things in your head first, and then go to the site and just experience it and see what starts to come up for you. And there are a number of different approaches, but as long as it's something that is meaningful to you, and it's something you really feel, then it's going to lead you to where you need to get to. So it's really is the simplest thing. And I mean, you could say it's on site, but I mean, over the past years, there have been times when we haven't been able to go to site, we haven't been allowed out of our houses. And so it's also possible to do it just anywhere you happen to be, to just experience the world and kind of draw in, well, what is it that starts to attract me or interest me? And that will still, it will sum up such big things that it will be really relevant to your project as well.
Yeah, it almost sounds like a bit like a jigsaw. You kind of start from a point where you're not quite sure exactly where it's going to end up, but you're getting all these little pieces. Because I think when we first started, I'm in diploma now, but when you first started certificate, I remember the tutor saying you kind of end up feeling like you've got to rush to the point of design without even really doing any of the research, because you think, oh, I need to get something down on paper. And it takes a few projects to realise, oh no, there's little pieces together and it's kind of forming, and then you can see how it's developing looking back.
That's such a nice way of describing it. The process is just, it's 80%, it's huge.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think that also, when you go to the site, I think it's so important spending time there and really getting a feel of the place and understanding, and I think that what will happen is that you walking around it, you will have all these thoughts, and these are the thoughts that I think will drive your concept and will drive your idea. It's a very personal thing, and this is what that students need to trust their instinct in a way, and capture it. And even if nothing happens from this photograph or this video that you might take, you can take a view on that later. Just capture anything that triggers your imagination and makes you think about things, and I think that's what's really important. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Are there any other questions? I think for me, picking up on what you've both spoken about, you've spoken about this personal reaction. Eliana, you talked about it as a personal reaction to a project, to the concept is your personal reaction to a project, to a site, that feeds a design narrative. And it's the layering, I think, of that personal reaction, of the practicalities of what a site and a brief require, that create this very personal but practical response to a problem, a design problem, which is something that is the value of architecture and three-dimensional thinking. It's how all of those layer together that that is representative of architecture as a whole. And the way you talk so poetically about concept really feeds into that that narrative of the strength of architecture and what architectural design is. And Sarah, I love the fact that you talked about the value of you. It's a personal thing, and I think it's really important that we value what each individual architect or each individual student brings to the process of architectural design. That when you bring a series of students onto a program to learn and develop that architectural thinking and response, that as much as the practical qualities of what they're presenting, what they're representing is themselves and how they personally respond to each of those design problems. It's being that, I think you talked about it, the representative of your representative of your voice. And it's so, there's a poetry in how you've presented it today and how you've talked about it, but also how that knits in with the practicalities and competences of also being an architect, how those layer together. That I find really, really fantastic to see woven through the student projects that you've presented. Are there more questions?
Sorry, I might take opportunity if no one else.
Yeah.
Yeah, so is there, obviously you're saying, and quite nicely summed up there, so it's a very personal thing, each project. Has there ever been a situation though where you can see it's obviously coming from a personal thing and there's development, but there's a point in the stage where you think, this might actually not be going the right way for a student? If it's coming from a personal point of view or a personal subject for a student, is there a way a project actually isn't developing the way that it should be? Sorry, that was kind of a question.
Sarah, you're on mute.
Yeah, we're being too polite and waiting for each other.
I know.
But yeah, I can see what you're saying, but because you're working with a tutor, and that's it's about this collaboration, that at each step it's this conversation that is also keeping it within the bounds of the extent, so the project doesn't become unmanageable, but it also doesn't become too small, and they're kind of keeping that on track, but also kind of challenging anything along the way. But I mean, I suppose that there are some concerns that are more tricky to kind of embody within architecture, and if it's something physical, maybe that leads to more direct response. But even if it becomes something psychological, there are ways that can clearly have a response within form. So I would kind of say no, if you're working with your tutor and you're both kind of on board on this it's kind of a journey of uncovering this and investigating into what it is and what it means, and you're kind of open about pushing it forward. Not really.
Yeah, I totally agree. Sorry, I totally agree with what Sarah's saying, because I think that if you do go to the site and you do, capture all these observations that you might have and bring those to the table and discuss them with your tutor, and I think there will be lots of opportunities for each and every one of those observations to be important and to be able to provide further research. And I think, focusing on observations that a lot of, you know, have research, have things that you can study and kind of you know, look into, I think really helps as well. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just wanted to kind of pull
it's
it.
fine. No, I was just going to say, because like, yeah, in the past I've had projects where it might not necessarily going down the wrong path, but you've got different branches and then you've got to focus it down one way. So it might be start with quite a broad range and spectrum of ideas, and then you think, oh, actually this is the one that I want to go down, and then
it's about the what that I want means. It's kind of what's important to me, why is this of interest to me, and narrowing it down that way. So you're kind of inquiring into yourself. You know, it's if you stop doing that it can start to go off the rails a bit, and you think actually that'll be the more flashy project or the more interesting project. But if you're kind of true to that and true to that inquiry, that's the way to kind of just gradually hone it down.
It's your interest going on. Oh, I think someone else has flagged up now. Yeah, I'll leave it to them now.
Yeah, hi, it's Constantina. Just to follow up on that, I had my fair share of design projects who, you know, were very personal and the concept kind of got through. And this year for my design project, the concept is again very personal and psychological, but being observant of the site and trying to explain as much of the feelings that you felt once you visited the site kind of really helps get through what you feel, because feelings are not very real things to which you can sorry kind of got stage fright. Feelings are not realistic things that you can see or touch. It's more of a sense, and being able to project that sense on paper sometimes might be very difficult for some people. But the more you observe and the more you record your observations through photographs or site visits, and the more you become knowledge of your site, the more easy it will be to create your idea. I managed to say what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolina.
Yeah, I think that's great, and you know, just to start with that, but then also to find out who are the other people that share that, and what does it mean? What's the bigger thing that you're kind of identifying, because you won't be alone. So trying to find your friends.
Thank you. I'm aware we've shifted over time a little bit, but it's so good to get some questions in. But because of that, I need to tie things up now. Sarah, Eliana, thank you so much for your presentations today. They've been really fantastic. Thank you to everyone who engaged with the programme and for coming along. It's brilliant to have you. And yeah, it's been fantastic to be able to sit on a Friday afternoon and talk about things that I think excite us and we enjoy about architecture. So thank you both so very much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
It's been great
pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.